Okay, let's dive right into this. Every single thought you've ever had, every movement you make, and literally every emotion you feel, it's all controlled by one absolutely incredible network, the human nervous system. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're embarking on a pretty fascinating journey into the complex anatomy and physiology of this system. We often think of ourselves as just, little uniform blobs, but the reality is that our bodies contain a stunning diversity of specialized cells, perfectly engineered for their unique jobs. And honestly, the most spectacular of them all are the ones that make up the network we're exploring today. To really wrap our heads around how all this works, we're taking a macro to micro approach, starting wide and zooming all the way in. Here's our agenda. 1. Mapping the nervous system. 2. Inside the amazing brain. 3. Fight, flight, or rest. 4. Neurons and glial cells. And 5. The action potential.
All right, part 1, mapping the nervous system, the geography of the body's communication network.
Structurally speaking, what's really interesting here is how cleanly our body's hardware divides into two very general regions. On one side, we have the central nervous system, or the CNS. This is your brain and your spinal cord. Think of it as the ultimate command center. It's taking in all the data, processing it, and executing responses. And then, on the flip side, we have the peripheral nervous system, the PNS. This is literally all the other nerves branching out through your entire body. The PNS is out there, constantly gathering sensory intel from your environment and feeding it right back up to that CNS command center.
Moving on to part 2, inside the amazing brain, exploring the ultimate command center.
But hey, before we break down the actual structure, I've got a question for you. Humans only use 10% of their brain. Have you ever heard this classic childhood myth? Seriously, take a second and think about how often this idea gets tossed around in movies and pop culture.
Well, consider that myth totally busted. It is completely 100% incorrect. We use incredibly vast networks of our brain, way more than just 10%, for literally everything we do. Okay, so now that we've cleared that up and established the actual facts, let's break down the brain's real functioning anatomy.
So the crucial point is right here. If we look at the brain's architecture, it divides into 3 highly specialized regions. Down at the base is the hindbrain, which houses the medulla, pons, and cerebellum. This area handles the foundational stuff, breathing, blood pressure, heart rate, and keeping your physical balance. Moving up, we've got the midbrain sitting deep inside. This manages your alertness, your sleep and wake cycles, and motor activity. And finally, the forebrain. This is where the heavy lifting of being human actually happens. It includes the cerebrum, which is divided into those 2 famous hemispheres, and it handles our speech, reasoning, and emotions. It also contains the thalamus for routing sensory info and the hypothalamus, which is a major control center for your endocrine system.
Part 3, fight, flight, or rest, the autonomic nervous system.
Now, this autonomic system divides into 2 opposing teams. On one side, the sympathetic system. You probably know this as fight or flight. And sure, it kicks in if you're, say, running from a bear, but let's be real. It's also triggered if you're face-to-face with your ultimate nemesis, the office copy machine. Just imagine it. You have exactly 60 seconds to get your copies before a meeting, and the machine starts making those terrifying grinding noises and flashing vague error codes. Your heart races, your breathing spikes. And interestingly, your digestive system completely stops. Because, frankly, if you're battling a rogue piece of office equipment, digesting your lunch is just not a priority. Now, opposing this is the parasympathetic system. This is your rest and digest mode. It drops your heart rate, kicks digestion back into gear, and just calms the whole body down. They beautifully counterbalance each other on the exact same organs.
Section 4, neurons and glial cells. Meet the microscopic main characters.
All right, let's zoom way in. First up is the most famous specialized cell, the neuron. A typical neuron has a few key structural parts. You've got the cell body, which holds the nucleus. Branching off of that are the dendrites, which act like little antennas receiving incoming signals. Then you have the axon. And a really great memory trick here is that axons carry the signal away to another cell. Finally, the synapse is that tiny microscopic junction area where the neuron actually communicates with its neighbor.
But here's the thing. Neurons aren't working alone. Enter the glial cells, or glia. Fun fact, the word glia actually comes from the Greek word for glue, and for the longest time, students were taught that these were just supporting cells, simple biological glue holding the important neurons in place. But calling them glue is a massive understatement. They are actually critical powerhouses of the brain.
Let's see how this builds, because glial cells have absolute superpowers. They balance vital chemicals between cells and maintain that super strict blood-brain barrier to keep unwanted toxic stuff out. Crucially, they also create myelin sheaths. These act like insulation around the neuron fibers, which allows electrical signals to jump lightning fast across the gaps. On top of that, they produce protective fluid and provide essential immune defense. So yeah, they are way more than just glue.
And finally, Section 5, the action potential, the chemical and electrical spark. To really understand how a neuron fires, we have to look at what it's doing when it's just resting. Astonishingly, even a resting neuron has a measurable electrical charge. Specifically, it sits right around -70 millivolts. It is literally more negative on the inside than its outside surroundings, and that's all due to a very delicate balance of ions, primarily sodium and potassium. Actually, here's a fun little memory device to help visualize this resting state. When a cell is at rest, potassium, which is represented by K+, has a higher concentration inside the cell. Meanwhile, sodium, or Na+, is higher on the outside. So just remember, it's cool to be K+ resting inside the cell. And the mechanics of this brilliantly illustrate the journey of a signal. So what happens when that resting state gets broken? Well, first, the dendrite receives a signal. That triggers ion channels to pop open, allowing all that positive sodium to just flood inside. This rapid change in charge is called depolarization, and it cascades right down the length of the axon. When this electrical signal hits the very end, it triggers the release of chemical neurotransmitters. Those chemicals float across that tiny gap between cells, bind to the receptors on the next neuron, and boom, this incredibly fast cycle starts all over again. Now, there's one absolutely vital rule to remember about this spark, and that's the all or none principle. An action potential doesn't happen by degrees. Just like flipping a light switch on the wall, it is either entirely on or it is entirely off. There's no dimmer switch here. The electrical charge has to hit a very specific threshold, and if it does, it fires at full capacity, every single time.
So let's zoom all the way back out for a second. From the vast, sprawling map of the central and peripheral systems, down into the deep emotional centers of the brain, past those amazing hardworking glial cells, all the way to the microscopic flooding of sodium ions, we have unpacked an extraordinary amount of complexity today. But you know, with a system this intricate, there's still just so much we don't know. Ongoing research is absolutely vital. And it leaves us with a really profound question. With such an incredibly complex biological network, what future discoveries in neurology will finally cure diseases of the nervous system? Stay curious, keep exploring, and thank you so much for joining me on today's Explainer.